Good day, gentlemen. This is the first installment in our four-group leader cheat sheet video. What's the intent of this video? Well, what do you think of when I say cheat sheet? I'll tell you what I think of. I think of high school. Why? Because it was in high school where I first learned what a cheat sheet was. In the most negative sense, there were some students who would try and sneak a sheet of paper under their test, right? And on that piece of paper would be clues or answers, little hints and bits of information to help them understand and answer questions correctly on the test. And of course, that is cheating. It was wrong. Sometimes they got caught, sometimes they didn't. I did, however, have one science teacher who on occasion would allow us to have a cheat sheet and bring it with us on the test. He said, whatever you can fit onto this sheet is yours to reference when you take the test. Sometimes it was an 8.5 by 11. Sometimes it was just a note card, right? You couldn't fit the whole unit's worth of content on your sheet, but you could list the highlights, the most important things. You write down hints to help you unlock all the information that you've already consumed by way of reading the textbook. What a dream, a legal cheat sheet. Well, this is what I'm providing you, a legal cheat sheet by way of video, of course. You've signed up to participate in a four-group, and for some of you, especially those of you who might have signed up to lead or facilitate a four-group, it can be a little bit daunting. I get that. You might be thinking, how do I do this? How do I lead a discussion? Well, that's my objective here. I just want to give you a few hints each week on some of the highlights, some of the main things you might talk about. I'm not going to summarize all the material you may or may not be going through, but I'll just hit a couple of high points that hopefully will give you a hint as to where you might start the conversation. How do I start the conversation? Well, I'll give you some hints. First of all, I'm only going to cover 2 courses of study here. Some of you have said, I'd like to talk about the sermon in our four-group. For you guys, I'm going to give you a hint as to what the upcoming week's sermon will be about. We actually have on our website, on the Christ Pres website, all the study guides for the past week's sermons. Those give you a great summary as to what we've already talked about. So I'm going to give you a preview as to what the upcoming sermon is going to cover, okay? And then you can take it from there. And if you want to reference past sermon studies, those are on the website. This is going to give you a preview of what we're going to talk about this coming up Sunday. Then there are some of you who have decided to go and read through the book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. For you guys, I'm just going to give you the main theme from the current week's chapter and a hint as to where you might start the discussion, okay? And for the rest of you, for those of you who aren't doing a sermon study or the book, you can still watch these cheat sheet videos, and maybe it provides for you a topic to discuss with your four-group. And besides, it's being in tune with what the rest of us are doing, and hey, why not slip in a conversation that's relevant to what everyone else is talking about too, within the context of your discussion. Go for it. But whatever the case may be, more than anything, just get to know each other. Get to know each other. Don't feel like you have to have a whole lesson plan put together. Really, this should be friendly, a casual time to connect, and yes, hopefully a time to enter into some meaningful conversation too, okay? So let me begin. Normally these videos won't be more than a few minutes, 3 to 4 minutes, I'd say. I'm going to try and keep them to about 3 to 4 minutes. This one is going to be a bit longer because I had to explain to you what in the world this is. So congratulations on making it this far. So let's get into the content. First, the sermon. This week's sermon, this coming up week, the sermon is on 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 to 14. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 to 14. The title of the sermon is called Guard the Gospel. Okay, 2 Timothy, in case you didn't know this from last week, but 2 Timothy is a letter from Paul to his young son of the faith, Timothy. And Paul is imploring Timothy to be faithful to the gospel despite the hardships they face. Now, as Paul writes this letter, he's actually in prison and facing death, okay? He's going to die soon. Nevertheless, he tells Timothy to follow his example and do not be ashamed of the gospel. Don't be ashamed of the gospel, but share in suffering for the gospel by the power of God, okay? So again, as Paul writes this letter in prison, he's telling his young protege, don't be ashamed of the gospel, but guard it, protect it. Consider it a treasure. You see, how was salvation for you and me secured? Through suffering, through humiliation, through shame, right? But it was through that suffering that salvation was secured. And from that shame and humiliation, glory and honor are brought forth. So he's telling Timothy, don't be discouraged. Even though I'm facing death, don't be discouraged, he's saying. The gospel is something to be treasured. It's worth it. It's all worth it. So what's your discussion point for this week? Start with discussing what the gospel is. Just ask, what do you think the gospel is? How do you define the gospel? What does it mean to you? What is it? And how do you apply it to your life? What, if you can define the gospel, how does that make its way down to everyday life here in the 21st century? Okay, then ask of each other, why is it worth defending and sharing in the suffering? You know, okay, start with that and see where the conversation goes. Keep it simple, okay? For those of you going through now the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality book, you're gonna enjoy this book, I promise you. And this week you're in chapter 1. The author is asking you to evaluate yourself in this first chapter. So who might benefit from this book? To a greater or lesser extent, all of us. Why? Because I think at some point we look at spirituality, and at least once in a while, it feels kind of like a drag, right? If you've ever thought, you know, I seem to be doing all the right things. I'm going to church. I'm in a 4 group, right? I'm serving. So why isn't my faith more joyful, right? Why does my faith still feel like a drag? What am I doing wrong? Okay. If you've ever had thoughts like that, this book is for you. Now, hear me out here. I know the Christian faith isn't always snow cones and pony rides, right? No. Like I was just saying before in discussing the sermon this upcoming week, suffering is a part of the journey. You can't do without it. It will happen. But your faith should never be a drag. Imagine Jesus, okay? Imagine Jesus. He knew what he was going to face in the cross, but as the author of Hebrews describes it, Hebrews 12:2, he says it this way, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. He was facing the cross, and yet the author here describes it as for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. I don't know about you, but the cross doesn't seem like a joyful proposition, whatever the outcome is, you know, right? But this is how the author of Hebrews describes it. Your faith should never feel like a drag. Whatever you're going through, there should always be a foundation of joy, okay? And if that joy is escaping you perpetually, even, I know we have our ups and downs, our good days and bad days, but if it's perpetually escaping you, then start with a list that the author gives in this book, okay? Right near the beginning, in chapter 1, the author gives us the top 10 symptoms of emotional unhealthy spirituality. Top 10 symptoms of emotional unhealthy spirituality. So here's your conversation starter. Here's where you start the conversation. Just go through that list. Go through those top 10 things and see how many of those things resonate with you. Try and be honest about it, okay? Try and be honest about it. It's the temptation is to go through the list. I don't have a problem with any of these. See, that's part of the problem. We've all got little pitfalls here that we face in those top 10 lists. Try and be honest about it. And I know that can be difficult to do, but you can do it. For me, I'll just tell you right now, numbers 1 and 6. Numbers 1 and 6, I struggle with those to this day. How about you? Discuss, okay? All right, so that's your cheat sheet for week 1. And again, more than anything, like I said, get to know each other. Just get to know each other. Have a great time. Connect. That's what this is all about. It's a connect group, essentially. It's a small connect group. Get to know each other. Establish a foundation here and commit to doing it again. Try and commit to it every single week, once a week, and prayerfully go deeper each time, okay? Thanks for tuning in. I wish you the best. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to send me an email or a text message, phone call, whatever the case may be. Happy to talk through any challenges or pitfalls you're running into as you continue on with these 4 groups, okay? Thanks for being a part of them. And again, we'll talk to you next week. We'll see you then.